in April, my husband Mike and I were lucky enough to watch the hit Broadway musical Hamilton. Any Hamilton fans out there?
Yeah.
Some of you, yeah. I didn't quite know what to expect, but we loved it. There are so many great songs and quotable lines from the show, but of course, the pastor in me keeps coming back to George Washington's farewell address captured in the song One Last Time. Because in it, he quotes the scripture we just heard. Everyone shall sit under their own vine and fig tree, and no one shall make them afraid. They'll be safe in the nation we've made. It's this moment when this huge, grand hero, a commander in the Revolutionary War, the first president of the United States, he wants to just go home, return, and enjoy the fruits of his labor and be at peace and safe in this new country that he has helped create. When the prophet Micah wrote these words nearly 3,000 years ago, it was the same sense of wanting to find peace in every sense of the word, that nations would stop waging war and people would end their violent ways, turning their swords into plowshares, and that everyone would have what they need to live and live abundantly. Jesus says in the Gospel of John that I have come so that they may have life and have it abundantly or to the fullest. And that's what your own vine and fig tree represent. The ability to have access to adequate food, the fig tree, and drink, the vine, and then of course respite from war and fear. The kingdom of God, as Micah portrays it, is just that simple. The ability to eat, to drink, and be not afraid. It is just that simple, and yet it is just that hard. Because consider the last few weeks. We've undergone a horrifying hurricane season with damage to homes and entire islands, sometimes met with little or delayed relief. There are still those who are waiting to get access to adequate food and water. And we've witnessed yet another deadly, tragic, and senseless shooting in Las Vegas. Many times we live in fear of these terrorizing acts. And we continue to live in a country with immigration laws that have not been reformed in over 30 years, making it nearly impossible for some immigrants to live at peace, let alone abundantly. The laws that we have on our books date back to when the Soviet Union was still on our maps, apartheid was still the law in South Africa, and the Berlin Wall separated East and West Germany. That's the last time we did anything to those laws on those books. So as we consider the reality of living in the United States in 2017, I think how elusive it actually is for everyone, and I mean everyone, to sit under their own vine and fig tree. I don't doubt that this country has opportunity and hopes for a new kind of life. That's why my parents immigrated here over 30 years ago, and why immigrants continue to come. But we can do better still. As people of faith who live in this nation, our call is to help create a country and a world where all may have access to their own vine and fig tree. A world where each and every human being has enough to eat, enough to drink, and can do so without fear, be it in this country or any country. Creating this world, making this possible in this global society involves education and housing and accompaniments of those who just want to be safe in this nation we've made. It will require changing policies, advocating for justice and fair trade, and considering fair and humane immigration reform. Several years ago, this church, this congregation, made a commitment to help break cycles of poverty. We alleviate immediate needs when we give to those who are living in poverty, but we help break cycles of poverty when we address deeper systemic problems that keep people in that situation. We are willfully negligent if we ignore how migration and immigration impact cycles of poverty. As this congregation considers becoming a sanctuary church, you all may have received a letter via email or at home. As we consider what it means to live into a vision where all have access to enough, we are lucky to have partners who are doing some of this work on the ground and to learn and hear the stories of immigrants and migrants in the Bay Area. Today we have Sarah Lee and Key Lamb here with us from the Interfaith Movement for Human Integrity, which is a faith-rooted advocacy organization with a vision that all human beings are sacred across all borders. They will be at the 11:30 education hour in the lounge, and we encourage you to come and hear more and also to speak with Elder Stephanie G, who will be there, and other elders who will want to talk with you and discuss what it means to be a sanctuary church in this day and age. But please welcome me in joining Sarah Lee and Key Lamb.
Good morning, Calvary. Thank you, Pastor Joanne, for inviting both Key and I to be here. It's a pleasure to worship with you all today. Again, my name is Sarah Lee, one of the organizers with the Interfaith Movement for Human Integrity, and it's an organization working in immigrant justice and criminal justice reform for over 2 decades here in California. Key and I are part of a Bay Area-wide project called Sanctuary Dialogues that connects congregations to hear directly from those historically and currently impacted by our immigration policies. And our hope is to uplift the human story of immigration that has been made political, but at heart, as I've heard Key share many times, a sacred story, a spiritual journey of resilience. It's a story that calls us as listeners to respond in the way that Jesus has taught us to love God and our neighbor. And so together we've been asking a more focused question of how do we love our neighbor if we don't know them or if we don't know their stories? And to be more specific, how do we love our neighbors if they have been deported, separated, detained, and imprisoned? This brings us out of a personal, willful love interpersonally to a love that challenges our systems, like Pastor Joanne mentioned, to create access to these vines and figs, places of safety and thriving, especially for those who have been subjected to live without. So without further ado, it's an honor to introduce my friend and colleague, Key, who will be sharing with you all today.
So, good morning, church. I don't like to have my back against people. So I would, once in a while I'll turn around and talk to you as well. God bless. We're blessed to be in a country that's full of, wealth and beauty. But most of all, we're blessed to be in a country where there's a lot of freedom. If you compare that to other countries in the world, where we don't really have to worry a lot about shootings or major rampants of poverty. We can look around and we got, especially in San Francisco. I grew up in the city. I love the city. Grew up all over the part of the city. One thing I really do appreciate about San Francisco is that the people. San Francisco is so diverse. Growing up, I remember I was surrounded by not just African American, not just by Samoan people, but I was surrounded by a lot of Irish, a lot of Dutch, a lot of Jewish, but every walks of life. That's one thing I love about San Francisco. But other thing I love about San Francisco is that there is such a spirit here of welcome. People here are open to helping each other. So I want you to imagine real quick a 7-year-old boy facing one of the toughest decisions in his life. The decision is, in front of his bullies, that the bully said you have 2 options. Option 1 is that you don't fight and we just jump you. Option 2 is you fight and we might not jump you. So what do you think that little boy's decision was at that time? Scared out of his mind. Something we talk about is fear. The 7-year-old boy was afraid out of his mind. Surrounded by a bunch of other kids with the inability to communicate his fear. Without being able to say, can I just be? So this young boy, this 7-year-old kid, made the hard decision to say, I will fight one of you. At the end of the fight, the 7-year-old boy that was petrified out of his mind stood over the other kid, fist balled up, heart pounding, and then to witness other kids running his way, his other bullies, congratulating him. So you can imagine his framework of his mind, like what just happened? Why am I getting congratulated? So I want to say, you can probably know by now, I was that 7-year-old kid, that had to face that hard choice of fighting another kid. A kid that I did not want to fight, a kid I did not even know. And so as I grew up in my life, I normalized violence. Violence was a means to solve everything, because violence everywhere around me was normal. And that was here in San Francisco. Sadly to say, right? A place, a city that is very, you could say, free to a lot of stuff. So I don't know what you know about formerly incarcerated people, but I am formerly incarcerated. At the age of 17, I committed a crime that I regret for the rest of my life, that I live with for the rest of my life. And just recently, after 23 years, I was released. So I'm pretty sure you're very intelligent, where I spent most of my life incarcerated versus being in society. So when I came home, I was scared out of my mind, because part of me was still 17, even though my body was 40 years old. And so I'm on this journey of starting basically over. It's like if I was to ask you to come with me to another country, that would be the same concept for you as well. You have to start all over again at 40, 50, 60 years old. And so I'm coming home with this fear of, will society accept me again? Will they look at me for the crime I committed in my life? Will they look at me as that 17-year-old kid that should have done better or knew better? And so growing up, I want to share another piece of my life. I didn't ask to come, right? I didn't ask to leave my country. So I was born in Vietnam. In 1978, my family and I fled Vietnam because the Communist Party was taking over. The reason why we fled, because like a lot of immigrants, while we flee our country, it's either because of war, or poverty, or sickness, or being dislocated. And so the reason why my family and I fled, because either we stay and face death, or we leave with our life. On the process of fleeing our country by boat, my mom witnessed her parents get murdered by the Communist Party, and many others that was on the same boat with her. As we journeyed to America, after 2 years arriving in America, my dad decided, you know what, I don't want to be part of this relationship no more. And so it was just me and my mom. And so my mom had a really hard time accepting the fact that she's all alone. In a country where she don't speak the language, in a country where she don't know the rules, in a country where she don't feel accepted. So we grew up a lot of time around poverty. So we lived in a lot of the poor neighborhoods in San Francisco. And I faced a lot of challenges. The challenges of being taken out of school to go with my mom to translate English. And I remember doing this as young as the age of 8 years old. At the age of 8, my mom had my baby brother, which I'm blessed to say is, wow, such an inspiration to me today. But I remember growing up at 8 years old, I took it upon myself to stay home for a whole year and raise my little brother on my own. And the reason why I did that, because the people that was taking care of my little brother were very abusive, neglectful, uncaring, unloving. And so at 8 years old, I decided, I was going to be a parent to my little brother. And you probably was wondering, like, where's your mom in all this? My mom had a big disconnection to the community, to the problem. And so her way of dealing with it was to be absent. Not just mentally, emotionally, but also physically. And this built on, for me, a long life of resentment and distrust with just not just my mom, but to people. Because my belief is, if I can't trust my mom, how can I trust somebody else? So growing up, I had that helping hand. People did offer to help me, but I had a hard time accepting that, because my fear was, you might reject me or leave me as well. You might abandon me as well. So why should I open up to you? So I did really well in school. Surprisingly, I was actually offered to one of the best high schools in the nation, which is Low High School. But unfortunately, I was not able to attend that school because it's all the way across town. I was living in Patrol Hill at the time. And I think that would have made like a huge difference to me. But what I really want to talk to you about is, we talk about sanctuary. I remember growing up, I didn't understand why people commit crimes. And I was quick to judge people. I remember as a kid, we drove by San Quentin many times, and I always asked my mom, like, what is that place? And she said, that's where all the bad people go. And I accepted that. I accepted that until 20-some years later, I was on the side of that wall. And I realized all the people that I have met during my time in incarceration are just like everyday folks that made very bad decisions in life. And the scariest thing, the saddest thing that they face is coming home and being judged for the crime they committed. But one thing I realized since I've been incarcerated and becoming a certified rape crisis counselor and many different mentors, and I got many different trades. I could come to your house and fix your plumbing if you needed to, right? Or I could give you family counseling. So I could teach you how to talk to your kids when they don't want to listen to you. But besides all that, one thing I realized, despite all the certifications and all the degrees I have acquired since my incarceration, it doesn't mean nothing when I came home. Because people still couldn't see beyond my crime, couldn't see beyond my trauma as a kid, couldn't see beyond all the hurt and pain that I suffered. And then so it makes me think, especially after becoming a Christian and having to face the same persecution or the same rejection from my fellow brothers and sisters in Christ, that was really hard for me to swallow. Because when I took that oath, like the great people that took the oath this morning, to love, others and to help others. And when I took that oath I took it sincerely because, there's something that I learned deeply about being a Christian is that faith without work is dead. If we say we're a Christian, if we say we love God's people, if we say we love our neighbors, how can we turn our backs to them despite what they've done in their life? It's hard, even for me at times. I still go through the challenge of being judgmental. Because one thing I realize, I'm still human. And one thing that Jesus, being a Christian, really taught me to do is really to look beyond people's past. And so I welcome you today to further this dialogue of sanctuary and also what it means to be a Christian. So I thank you for your time, and God bless.